the problem that I have with that view, which you just alluded to, is this, that it seems to be saying that it's mental activity itself that thinks. And that seems like a very elementary sort of confusion. Thinking is mental activity, so the thing that does the activity or that engages in the activity is not the activity itself. Yeah. That would be like saying that it's motion that moves,
or the nothing that nuts.
Sorry,
the nothing that nuts, as Heidegger says.
Right. Well, I'm not sure whether that's the same point or not, but don't ask me any questions on Heidegger.
Can robots think? Is artificial intelligence actually possible? And why do we always focus on artificial intelligence or artificial thought and not artificial thinkers? That's the question we're going to be answering today. I have with me Dr. Eric Olson, and he's a professor of philosophy. He's a big deal in the philosophy of mind, and I'm really excited to have him on because we read one of his papers in my philosophy of technology class with Brandon Rickabaugh at Palm Beach Atlantic University, and it was a fantastic paper, and I thought I have to talk to this guy about this stuff. So we're going to be going through different variations, different views on artificial thinkers and why they might not work. So I'm really excited. Stay tuned for that. Before we jump in, I want to thank everyone over on Patreon for making this podcast happen. If this is one of your top 5, top 10 favorite podcasts, and you want to see me around talking to more guests like Dr. Olson, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. You can find a link in the description wherever you're getting this podcast episode at, and you can join for various different amounts. There's lots of different prizes you can get at different levels too. So if you want to see me continue doing this stuff, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. All right. Well, without further ado, let's jump in with Dr. Eric Olson. Dr. Olson, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
I really, really love this. I wore one of my favorite shirts for you. It's Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Oh, yes.
I actually have it tattooed on my forearm here, too. It's kind of hard to see, but I love it. It kind of works with maybe an animalist view of personality or persons or substance dualism. Basically, robot thinking's out. So I wore that for you. I'm really excited for this. Before we jump in on thinking through artificial thinkers, I wanted to get a little bit about you. How'd you get into philosophy in the first place?
Oh gosh, that's a long goes back a long time now. Yes, I guess like a lot of people, I didn't get exposed to philosophy at school, so I went off to college intending to become a scientist. And then I found that my science was science and mathematics was a bit dry, but I had to take a course which involved philosophy. And that involved reading Plato, and I thought Plato was the bee's knees. That was very, very exciting. It was like nothing I'd ever come across before, and I was dead sure that I was sure that Plato was completely wrong in his theory of the forms and all of that stuff, and I thought I could show that he was wrong. It's very common for undergraduates to think that they're cleverer than Plato was.
Yeah,
and that wasn't an exception even.
That's awesome.
So that was my. Yes, well, that got me thinking anyway, and I thought for quite some time about what I wanted to do with my life and so on. And at the end of of that thinking process, I thought I wanted to switch from science to philosophy.
And the world's better for it. We love you over here in the philosophy side.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so then, how did you get into personhood and studying the philosophy of mind? There's a lot of different subfields you could have gone into. Why philosophy of mind type stuff?
Yes, that was much later when I was doing my PhD. I spent about 3.5 years or so doing courses. This was at Syracuse before deciding on a topic for my PhD thesis. And one of the courses that I took was a seminar taught by Peter van Inwagen on personal identity. And the main reading for this course was Peter Unger's book. What's it called? Let me just look at my shelf again. Sorry, I'm not supposed to do that, am I?
No worries. Go ahead.
Identity, consciousness, and value. I'm sure if I were on the BBC, they wouldn't let me get away with that, would they?
That's great.
Identity, consciousness, and value, which was new in those days. That was from 1990.
Okay.
And he discusses a whole lot of views about personal identity over time with lots of very complicated and ingenious thought experiments. But it was very striking to me at the time that every single view he discusses is incompatible with our being biological organisms. And I'd never thought about this conflict before. It seemed to me rather obvious, I suppose, or at least very plausible before entering into this debate at all, that I was an animal of some sort. And yet, every view that he considered had some sort of psychological component to it, and the differences were all about what, which version, and whether it had to be had to have some sort of continuous physical realization or something to that effect. He never considers a view of personal identity over time with no psychology in it at all, which I think is what you get if you believe that you're an animal. And so alerted me to the fact that there was a sort of a gap in the mainstream discussion.
Yeah, and you're like one of the leading guys in the animalist camp. Was that influenced by your time with PVI there at Syracuse?
Yes, that was his view.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's true. Though I'm not sure whether that was, and I did write my thesis with him as a supervisor, and that was very good. And I was influenced a great deal by Peter Van Inwagen, and he's the person, yes, whose thinking is the most like mine, or you might say I'm the person whose thinking is the most like him, perhaps.
Sure,
well, you
sure.
can almost say that. I'm his biggest fan, I think. Or at least there's no one who's a bigger fan of Peter than I am. But I think in this case, although he, I suppose, brought my attention to this incompatibility, I'm not sure whether, I don't think it was his agreeing with me that got me interested.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really,
and the fact that everybody else seemed to think otherwise.
Yeah. Well, did he at least, was he part of the reason that you came to think Plato isn't wrong? Did he make you a Platonist, a realist about abstracta?
Oh, no. By the time I met Peter, that was about 5 or 6 years after my reading Plato as a freshman, so I wasn't thinking about that any longer.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I really, really like your paper, and it is, oh shoot, what's the title here? It's
The Metaphysics of Artificial Intelligence.
There we go. Yep, the Metaphysics of Artificial Intelligence, and it's a really good chapter in this book. And I had the book with me too. It's Ontology. Shoot, do you remember the name of the book? I see. If this was the BBC, I'd get fired.
And the Ontology of Properties.
Consciousness. There we go. Ontology of Properties. It's in my notes somewhere, and I can't find it. There it is. Okay, thank you for that. So I'm really excited about this because you brought up this amazing point that everyone in artificial intelligence theory, they always focus on artificial thought, and they neglect artificial thinkers, because if there's going to be artificial thought, there should be an artificial thinker. And you kind of motivate this argument by saying, or this intuition, whatever, by saying, look, there's in natural thought, like the ones that you and I are having right now, there's a natural thinker having those thoughts. And so unless there's a really good argument for why there can be thought without thinkers, we should think that there should be an artificial thinker if there's artificial thought. Does that sound right? Is that your intuition there?
Yes. It's not so much an intuition, because it's not really a claim. It's just,
okay.
What is this? The discussion about the possibility of artificial intelligence is about, that is real artificial intelligence, is about intelligence or mental phenomena themselves. So the question is, could an electronic computer produce something mental? Mm-hmm. So is there something about the nature of mental phenomena, like consciousness or belief or preference or whatever it might be, that restricts it to biological organisms, or whatever that might be? Or could it be realized in an artificial electronic substrate?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a perfectly fair question, I suppose. But there's another question quite independent of that, which is, if artificial thought were possible, what would the artificial thinkers be like? Because for there to be thinking is for there to be a thinking thing. Mm-hmm. So it seems that way. Just as for there to be motion is for there to be something that moves, or for there to be life is for there to be something that's alive, a living thing. Yeah. So if there could be artificial intelligence, then there could be artificially intelligent beings. And what sort of being could it be that would be artificially intelligent? And that question might be difficult to answer. In fact, there might not be a very good answer.
Yeah.
But there has to be a good answer to that question if artificial intelligence is possible.
Yeah, and I love that. So
And nobody discusses that question, what I call the question of artificial thinkers.
right, and it's such a huge question, and when you said that, I thought, surely there's someone, and it's a really, really good question. It's pretty amazing that it's been so overlooked. I wonder, um, just tangentially here, I wonder what you make of Descartes' Cogito, because he brings up a similar type of thought in his Cogito thought experiment. If I'm thinking, then I exist as a thinker, and then he goes in for substance dualism, which I know you're not going to like there, or Cartesian dualism, whatever. But is that a similar move going on here, where you say if there's artificial intelligence, there has to be an artificial thinker?
There's some connection. Yes, I mean, I think the Cogito is Descartes' best argument.
Okay, that's awesome. Wow.
I think it's one of the best arguments in the whole of philosophy. It's not that people don't object to it, but he was clearly right to think that you can't think you exist and be wrong about it.
Yes, amen, man. It's so good to hear you say that.
You exist.
Yeah. What kind of
and most people accept that, even if they challenge the argument. Not very many people think that they don't exist. Don't usually disagree with the conclusion, or if they do, they might start disagreeing with it just because they've seen his argument for it. I mean,
yeah.
As I point out somewhere in the paper, oftentimes the best way to make a philosopher suspicious about a certain claim is to give a positive argument for
it. That's great. Well, so initially there was there's this claim that all that Descartes showed was that there's thinking going on. What do you mean? And I think of the Cogito as more of like a transcendental argument, where it's like it's presupposed, like there's a thinker presupposed if there is thinking. Swinburne says something like, there's a substance if there's this property of thinking, because properties don't just free float around. But what do you make of that claim that there's just thinking going on, that's really what it's showing?
Well, of course, you can give a Cogito style argument for the existence of thinking. I mean, there couldn't be it's obvious from the fact that we're asking the question that thinking is going on. You might say, okay, so that establishes that there is thinking, and the sort of objection to the Cogito argument that you're alluding to is roughly this: okay, that there might be a process of thinking going on, which is not the thinking of any being. It's just thinking goes on in the way that wind happens. It's not as if something is blowing. It's just wind. It's just something happening.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's thinking that's happening, and maybe thinking sort of congeals in a certain way. So there's all the thinking going on here, which has a certain sort of unity to it, and there's certain thinking going on there. I can't point to you. I don't want to point to. That's got a certain sort of unity, but the thinking is not an activity of anything. It's just activity. Mm-hmm. Or at best, it's an activity of something that's not itself thinking. It's an activity of, just like wind is an activity of air molecules. Thinking might be an activity of brain cells.
Yeah.
But it's an activity of lots of little things, none of which is thinking. Mm-hmm. Okay, so although I couldn't think I was thinking I couldn't think I exist and be wrong about it, there could be an occurrence of the thought I am thinking, or even I exist, which was false because it didn't refer to anything, because the first person thought I doesn't refer to anything.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a possible view, and that's the main objection, I suppose, to Descartes' Cogito argument. But that's a pretty wild claim, I suppose, if you think about it.
That's what I would think. Yeah.
And people would only consider that claim, I suppose, just because they want to find some objection to Descartes' argument, because a philosopher can't look at an argument without trying to formulate an objection. That's what we're trained to do, like a tech.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, so
doesn't just take off their hat and say, "Yes, well done, René Descartes, you win the prize."
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I thanks for indulging me on that. So your whole paper doesn't really doesn't hinge on whether Descartes was right or not, but I thought it'd be a fascinating thing, because we are saying, look, if there's a artificial thought there needs to be an artificial thinker, and then you can just stipulate, look, unless you come up with a really good argument that shows those two can come apart, and so go ahead and work on that, philosophy professors who are listening. But
Yes.
in the meantime, we can continue.
I haven't come across an advocate of artificial intelligence who denies that there are artificial thinkers.
Okay,
I suppose it's partly because they're not really thinking about metaphysics.
that's true. Yeah, that's
And it's only a metaphysician who would question whether thinking requires a thinker.
yeah, which is fantastic. Some people may think that is pedantic or something, especially in America, where our great philosophy was pragmatism. Unfortunately, that's what we get to offer the world. Maybe Jonathan Edwards in there too, but I think this is a huge open question that even those pragmatic artificial guys need to think through. So let's go over a couple of these options that you have for artificial thinkers. And I thought maybe we could categorize them by materialist views and then a couple immaterialist views, starting with maybe the computer hardware view.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not quite sure what the pragmatist would say, actually, but that is why the pragmatist would dismiss this worry of mine. It depends on what question they're asking. If the pragmatist just means we should get on with our artificial intelligence program, making our artificial intelligent machines and so on, and not worry about philosophy, then that's got no objection to that.
Right. Okay.
But that's not a pragmatist philosopher. That's a pragmatist saying we shouldn't bother with philosophy.
That's what I had in mind. Yeah, the computer science folks who are saying, "Oh, this is I don't want to get into metaphysics." And it's like, well, you might need.
Yes, it's just like a mathematician saying, "I'm not going to worry about the ontology of numbers or about the epistemology of mathematics. Yeah. I'm just going to do my subject and leave that to the people who are interested in that sort of thing."
Yeah, I always want to press them on that because I study philosophy. I like philosophy, so you should get clear on some of this stuff at least. If you're going to call yourself, if you're a mathematician, you're way smarter than me, but you should have some kind of view on whether the things that you study actually exist or not, right?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I'm not sure the answer to that question. I can imagine. I'm not sure if a mathematician is a poor mathematician if she refuses to engage with that question. But you might think there's something. You might think they're being intellectually, I don't know, negligent or insouciant in another way.
That's a good word. Yeah. I didn't mean to come at the mathematicians in the crowd. Sorry about that, folks. Well, let's jump in on the computer hardware view. Yes. It's the first one up. Can you just lay that out for us? What is that?
This is the view that the artificially intelligent being is the computer itself. So to create artificial intelligence is to make a computer intelligent or to give it mental properties, to make it conscious, and so on.
Yeah, Dr. Olson, do you think that this is like the main view out there? I know we've just kept saying that most people aren't thinking about the metaphysics of it, but what do you make? Did you list this one first because you thought maybe most people would think it's the computer itself, the physical computer?
Yeah, it seems like the most natural view, and it's the view that people talking about artificial intelligence most often state. I mean, I'm not sure whether they consciously state it. They just, perhaps because they don't consider alternatives, but they very often say that the artificial intelligence is the project, or the question of artificial intelligence is whether a computer could think. That's the most common statement of it. No one defends that statement or considers alternatives, but it seems like the natural thing to say, and I think it's probably also the best answer to the question.
Yeah. So
that's where to start.
Then you give some problems for it. So it's the best one, but it's not a knockdown theory here. And is it because is the main argument against this that there's two different histories, that the material computer would have a different history than the conscious thinker?
Well, I would rather put it by saying that this view is incompatible with the dominant views about personal identity, particularly personal identity over time. So the computer hardware view says that the intelligent being. So if you program your computer for intelligence and switch it on, and there it goes, it's intelligent. The computer hardware view is that the intelligent thing is that physical machine that was manufactured in China. Okay, so the intelligent being did not begin to exist when it became intelligent. It existed before it was switched on. It existed yesterday before it was programmed for intelligence, and so on and so forth. And if you switch it off, or if you stop running the program, the artificially intelligent being will not cease to exist. It will simply lose its intelligence. That's analogous to saying that if your mental life were permanently destroyed, you would carry on existing as a corpse, or or in a vegetative state.
Yeah.
And likewise, right? So that means, yes. And another case, it's commonly held that if you had an artificially intelligent being, it could move from one piece of hardware to another just by a transfer of information, right? So I could send it to your computer over the wires.
Yeah.
Right? Send it as an email attachment or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But of course, you can't send a piece of computer hardware as an email attachment.
Right.
Yeah, as a message by telegraph, as they say, and as the joke was in the 19th century in Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
So if you think that personal identity over time consists of some sort of psychological continuity, if that's sufficient or necessary, either one, that's incompatible with the computer hardware view.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up a question for the psychological continuity view. I've been listening to your some lectures from you all day, and you were talking about Terry Schiavo, and that case where she was, for those who don't know, she was unconscious or in a coma or brain dead for, was it like 10 years or something like that?
I don't remember.
Yeah, long time.
She was in a vegetative state.
Yeah, and so a lot of the intuitions were like she's not actually there anymore, and there's not psychological continuity happening anymore, but her body's being artificially kept alive. What do you make of so when it comes to the computer and shutting off the computer, the intuition is that like you've just destroyed the artificial being, and then when you turn it back on, they've come back to life. And I think a lot of people initially see that and they go, well, don't I go to sleep and have a dreamless sleep here and there, and yet I wake back up, and it doesn't seem like there's the same. It's like an analogous case to shutting off the computer. And so if I'm able to continue being the same self and have psychological continuity, though I went black for 8 hours last night, how come the computer can't? What do you make of that objection?
That's a nice question. Yes, I like that. Yes. The difference is that when you go to sleep, your mental architecture, if you like, is still there. Your mental life doesn't stop. I mean, it might stop being active. You might stop mental activity, but all of your mental states, your beliefs, your preferences, your knowledge, your personality, your sense of humor, that's all still there. Whereas if you quit the artificial intelligent program, or even delete it from your hard drive or whatever, then it's gone completely. It would be like wiping your brain completely.
Yeah.
And then reprogramming it from scratch. So the case of you're going to sleep, that would be more like a case where you start your program going and then you put your computer to sleep. They fall asleep, right? So the program is still there. I'm not a computer scientist, but it's still there in the computer chips. It's just that it's no longer active and everything is powered down so that it doesn't use too much electricity. The activity more or less stops.
Okay.
But all the information is still there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So because of the fact that you can take the information out and put it on a new computer, that shows that there's the computer hardware view is insufficient or false, because the actual physical computer and the actual artificial, if it were artificial thing, can be separated in a way that's not analogous to a human being.
Yeah, well, it's not that I think it's false. It's just that it's incompatible with the dominant view of personal identity over time. And in fact, I don't hold that view of personal identity over time, because I think you and I are animals, and an animal does not persist by virtue of psychological continuity.
Yeah.
Right? You can't send an animal as a message by telegraph. I mean, if we extract all the psychological information from your brain and send it as an email attachment, and somewhere in China they somehow feed it into somebody with somebody else with a new brain, that person wouldn't be you. We wouldn't have sent Parker as an email attachment. That would only be a joke.
Right.
So I think that, and likewise, if you're an animal, you don't come into existence when you become intelligent. You started out as a little tiny embryo.
Right.
You don't become intelligent much later on, and you might lose your mental life and still carry on existing,
Right.
In a comatose state or whatever. So that's my view. And if you hold that view, then this is no objection to the computer hardware view. But it would be important news if the very possibility of artificial intelligence was incompatible with the dominant view about personal identity over time, the psychological continuity view.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, touching on animalism just a little bit, if you made a clone of me, if psychological continuity is not how we cash out personal identity over time, if you made an identical organism to me, is that me? How do we adjudicate between those two?
When you say make a clone, do you mean we scan you, so to speak, and get all the information without doing you any harm, and then we use that information to arrange new atoms, say in the next room, just as your atoms were arranged when we made the scan, and the result is somebody who thinks he's you and remembers being scanned. And
well, so I think there might be two. There's two that I wanted to ask you about. One was just a clone, and you start him off as an embryo, so he's DNA is all the same. Because if psychological continuity isn't the key factor, then who cares if he has the same memories as me? Another one might be if we 3D scan me and 3D print me out of the same. Well, it's not the same material. Maybe you want to go with it's the same material, but he would have all the same memories, perhaps. Yeah. What do you?
Well, the first case, cloning in the biologist sense, of course, that person would be no more you than your identical twin would be you.
Yeah, that's a good case.
Just be somebody with the same genome as you. Nobody would think that was you.
Yeah.
Right.
Why? So a lot of people would say that's because if they will hold to like the psychological continuity, it's like because it's not you. You don't have the same histories as that person. How does an animalist say? What's the animalist reply on this? That
I'm not quite sure what the objection was, but it's clear that there are two different animals. But this is, it's not just the animals who would say that the clone that we make of you is not you. Everybody would say that. Nobody would say. No philosopher that I always hesitate to say that no philosopher ever said he, because someone always says, "Oh, I can think. I know of someone."
Right.
But at the risk of someone saying that, I'll venture to say that I've never yet come across a philosopher who said that if we make a clone of you in the way that Dolly the sheep was cloned, that person would be you. Okay. Despite appearances, that would be one person rather than two people.
Yeah.
Nobody holds that view.
Okay.
In the other case where we 3D print you, as you put it, that is, we scan you and we use that information to create a duplicate of you, as I would say, out of new atoms. Nobody would say that was you either. I don't think. It's clear that there are two different biological organisms. So according to animalism, it's not you, but there's also not any psychological continuity, I suppose. Is that right? Is that? Let me think before answering. Actually, well, nearly everyone would say it wasn't you. Maybe Shoemaker's view, where he thinks, because there's a sort of psychological continuity in that case, but right, because in that case, the duplicates, memories and personality and beliefs and so on and so forth and interests are caused by yours, the ones you scanned. So there's a sort of psychological continuity, although it's not caused by the continuous realization of it in a brain or something. So you might think that that's sufficient. If you thought that you could travel by Star Trek teleporter, you would say that was psychological continuity in that case. So in that case, it would be one of those troublesome fission cases. So there would be two people after the duplicate is made who were psychologically continuous with you as you were beforehand. And then we'd have to, then that's a bit of an awkward problem. Which one of them is you and why? They can't both be you,
right?
Because there are two of them.
Yeah.
So that shows that psychological continuity of that sort can't be sufficient for you to survive. But maybe this, maybe we need some sort of non-branching requirement, or some messy amendment of that sort.
Yeah, that's really good. I also I think about semantic externalism, and maybe if you do go in for that, maybe your concepts don't refer then either. Maybe on Shoemaker's view, even though it seems you think you have psychological continuity, if you don't have any causal interaction with the objects which your concepts are supposed to be fixed on, then your concepts don't refer. I guess that's predicated on semantic externalism being true, though, which.
Well, that's a further difficulty, quite independent of whether it's you. This is a question. Right. Your question is about the mental properties that our duplicate has got.
So I was thinking, I thought, because my mental property, my concepts, they refer to what I've been in causal interaction with, presumably, at least some of them. But if my twins, if he just printed right now, his concepts wouldn't refer in the same way that mine do. And so I would have maybe a better case of saying I'm me than he would.
Well, maybe when your duplicate says, I am Parker, because that's, of course, what he would say.
Yeah.
Maybe he might not be expressing the proposition that he's Parker, because he might not have the concept. His word Parker might not refer to you.
Yeah.
Because although there is a causal connection between it and between what he says and you, it might not be the right sort of causal connection. And the philosophers of language can debate about that, whether it's the right sort.
Yeah.
Okay, that might be a reason to say that he wasn't you, though it wouldn't be a conclusive reason.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is good. Thanks for letting me go down these rabbit trails here. The second materialist view, you call the temporal parts view, and it utilizes unrestricted composition and persistence through arbitrary temporal parts. And a lot of my listeners are master's students in philosophy and PhD students, and some professors as well. But some are going to be really confused by that terminology. Can you help us out with unrestricted composition and persistence through?
Oh gosh, yes. Well. First of all, you need to know what a temporal part is, because and this is the idea that it's the existence of temporal parts of persisting things like people is very controversial. A temporal part of you is a part of you that's just like you are, except it's short. Its extension in time is shorter. Okay, so it's perhaps, if you think about events like, say, a football game, it's got a first half and a first quarter and so on. Those are temporal parts of the game.
Yeah.
Right. Everything that's going on in the game during the first half is present in the first half as well as right. So it's the first half of the football game is just like the football game, only it's shorter, temporally shorter. And the assumption is that there's somebody that's just like you, only it's shorter, temporally shorter.
Yeah.
Your first half, let's say. So it extends from the beginning of your existence to the midpoint of your life, your career, and then it stops.
Yeah.
It's succeeded by something else, the second half of you. Okay, so we have to assume that you are made up of all of these temporal parts, which are just like you, only shorter. And what's more, they're arbitrary temporal parts. So for every period of time when you exist, for example, this week or today or this instant, there's a temporal part of you that exists only during that period.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so that's temporal parts, and then we have to assume that, well, any two things make up something bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the temporal part of you that exists right now, and the temporal part of you that existed the last time I clicked my fingers. There's something made up of those two temporal parts of you, something that's separated, something with two parts separated by 30 seconds or whatever it might be. And likewise, there's something composed of your first half and my second half, and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we've got those two assumptions, then there will be a material thing that does come into existence when you program your computer for intelligence, and it comes to an end when you quit the program. It's the temporal part of the computer that exists during that time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's always intelligent throughout its existence. Okay, so it respects the commonly held view that some sort of personal identity is necessary for a person to persist, or a conscious being. And likewise, if the program gets, how should we put it, transferred down the wires to another piece of hardware, there will be an object composed of the earlier temporal part of the first computer up to the point where the transfer takes place, and the later temporal part of the second computer, the one that begins when the program starts up on the second computer, and ends when the program is quit, I suppose, stops running. And that will respect the commonly held view that personal identity of some sort is sufficient for you to persist. This sort of view also takes care of the branching problem that you mentioned a moment ago.
Yeah.
So if there are two people psychologically continuous with you, they can both be you in the sense that there's something composed of your pre-fission temporal parts and the temporal parts of the person who stays behind and was scanned, and there's another one composed of the pre-temporal parts of you and the later temporal parts of the one who's made by the 3D scanner.
Yeah.
So there. So the pre-fission person who's conducting the interview is, well, actually there are two people there, insofar as your current temporal part is a part of two distinct people, which diverge later on.
Yeah. So I drew a picture. I don't know how well it's going to come up here, folks, but if you can see back home, there's like a block, and then a lower block, and then another block. So it's like if you're editing a video, like if I were to edit this video of us, and when you snap, I cut that out, and that goes down here, and I splice in a new video. It's like this video, and then it stops here, and then there's a new one here, and then there's a new one here, and they're different segments. They're different parts. They're different temporal parts, and you put it all together, and it's one video when I put it up on YouTube. And so that's kind of how I like to think of this, that you're just tracing the identity. Now it's here. But then when you edit a video, you put the one you're splicing in goes down here, and then you splice in a new one right here. And so you have these temporal parts, but you share it as one video.
I'm not sure whether I've understood the analogy, but it might help to say that on this view that I'm talking about, every, as Quine once put it, every matter-filled region of space-time contains an object, a physical object. Mm-hmm. Okay, so because there is a region of space-time that moves from one computer to another when the data is transferred or transferred, there's a physical object with that sort of career, which moves discontinuously, perhaps, from one computer to another.
Yeah. So Dr. Olson, that it sounds like when I first read it in your paper, I was like, oh, that's a really unique and fascinating, like really cool way of solving this problem. But then with unrestricted composition, it seems like it lets in everything. Like it's right. It's like a really scary thing. And now we have the this object that is like Bill Clinton's nose and my coffee mug and this pen, right?
Yes.
And so then does that really give us the personal identity if the artificial thinker is also connected to like everything else in reality at that moment or in that temporal part?
I think maybe what you're saying is this. You might ask, what would happen to me if my mental contents were erased from my brain and transferred electronically to your brain? Mm-hmm. Would I end up with a big mustache, or would I come to an end, or would I carry on without any mental contents, or what? And according to the Ontology of Temporal Parts, this question doesn't have a clear answer, because there is a being that does move from this organism to that organism. Again, I don't know where to point with the mustache. Okay, there's another being that comes to an end when the transfer takes place. There's a third being that carries on with an empty brain, so to speak, here. There's another being that suddenly becomes the moon, that suddenly jumps to the moon, and which is composed of my temporal parts up to the brain scan or brain wipe, and the moon's temporal parts located afterwards.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. There are a vast number of objects, any number of objects that have my current temporal parts as parts.
Yeah.
And all diverge, so to speak. At every moment, there are zillions of them, and they're all diverging because again, every matter-filled space-time contains an object, so there are perhaps an infinite number of matter-filled space-time regions which consist of all my temporal parts up to now and diverge afterwards.
Yeah.
And questions about what happens to me or about my persistence are really, well, they become linguistic questions. The question is, which of those things do we use the name Olson to refer to?
Yeah. Yeah. So I also think that's really good. And it's almost dizzying thinking through this type of stuff. I also think about if we have unrestricted composition, then isn't there there's like a higher order thing that is my brain and your brain together?
There's something composed of or made up of your brain and my brain, something that has them as parts. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So why isn't that thing a conscious being? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, of course. Yes. Or there's something made up of you and me.
Right.
Is that it's made up of two conscious beings. It's got two conscious beings as parts.
Yeah.
Is that being itself conscious? I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't believe that being exists because I don't accept unrestricted composition.
Same. Yeah. Right.
But if I did, that question must have an answer.
Yeah, and it seems like a problem for unrestricted composition.
The question of, say, the thing that's composed of you and your coffee mug, your mug, is that thing conscious? Is it a philosopher?
Right.
And so on. I don't know how to answer that question. I suppose I'm to answer no, but I'm not sure how to justify that answer.
And so that's what I think. If you go with the temporal parts view in order to solve some of the potential problems with computer hardware, like persistence over time, I think you end up with a lot of other weird questions that you have to answer as well, right?
I suppose. I mean, this is a metaphysical question that you asked. This problem of artificial thinkers, and any answer to any metaphysical question will raise lots of other metaphysical questions.
Sure, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay. So that's the temporal parts view. Any other criticism that you think is relevant for the temporal parts view?
Well, I suppose it implies that although a thinking being gets transferred from one piece of computer hardware to another when the information transfer takes place, another thinking being, well, at least one other one anyway, doesn't move. It stays where it is and simply becomes unconscious, or stops thinking, becomes unintelligent. So although, and likewise, when you program your computer for intelligence, there is a thing that was previously unintelligent that becomes intelligent, namely the piece of computer hardware, even if you have created a new intelligent being. So you might ask whether it really does justice to the conviction, for what it's worth, about the persistence of people or thinking beings.
Yeah, that's really good. I told you guys, the listeners, that this is a really good paper. It's a really good chapter in the book. You definitely check it out. It's hard to do it all justice on a podcast because certain things can be done better in writing. But I think we're doing an awesome job here. And so with that in mind, let's continue on to the constitution view. I think this one will be a little bit easier than the temporal parts. What's the constitution view?
So that's the view that there's often more than one material thing where there appears to be only one. So the standard example is the statue in a lump of clay. So we've got a lump of clay. I haven't got one here, but a lump of clay, and I model it into the shape of, let's say, Socrates.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I get frustrated with it and I squash it. Okay, now it's tempting to think that when I modeled the clay, that I created a statue. I didn't just change the shape of this pre-existing physical object. I created a new thing.
Yeah.
And when I squashed it, I didn't just change its shape, change it from a Socrates shape into a nondescript shape, but I destroyed a physical object, the statue.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you might think there are actually two physical objects here, the lump of clay and the clay statue, which have different histories and different futures. And and so on. So they differ in various respects, although they're physically indistinguishable. They're made of the very same atoms arranged in the same way. Okay, and a lot of philosophers think that you stand to that biological organism, or maybe that lump of flesh, in much the same way as the clay, as my statue of Socrates stands to the lump of clay that I made it out of. Okay, so that when a human organism reaches acquires certain mental properties in the process of prenatal development or whenever, it comes, well, a new thing is created, namely a person.
Yeah.
Right? Much the same way as a new thing is created, a new physical object is created when I model my lump of clay into the shape of Socrates. Okay. So you might, so lots of people think that a person is a material thing, just like an animal, but it's not an animal because it's got different persistence conditions, right? It's constituted by the animal. Constitution is just that relation that the clay statue stands to the lump of clay. Right, the lump of clay constitutes the statue. The organism constitutes the person. Yeah. So in this case, you might say the computer, when it's programmed for intelligence, it comes to constitute a thinking thing, an intelligent being. Okay, and when the program is shut down, when it stops running, that constituted object ceases to exist, much as my statue of Socrates ceases to exist when I squash it.
Yeah. So I'm if I read this right, I think you give a kind of a dilemma for this view, in that one, if there's two objects here, there's the computer and then the artificial thinker, which is constituted by the computer, then you either have like a two thinkers problem or too many thinkers problem, or one of them is a philosophical zombie, namely the computer. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, I mean, generally, the friends of Constitution don't want to say, with a few exceptions, that the thing that constitutes you is thinking and intelligent right now, organism, or that it's a person, because they want to say that a person comes into existence, and they wouldn't want to say that a second person comes into existence in addition to the first person.
Right.
They don't want to say that when you reach the right stage in your mental development, the organism comes to constitute a person, and the organism itself becomes a second person.
Yeah.
They don't want to say that. Nobody wants to say that. That's right. That would be. I mean, how would you know which person you were? Right. Besides, you want to say that any person, not just a constituted person, persists by virtue of psychological continuity. Okay. Yeah. And you also don't want to say that the organism is a conscious, rational non-person and psychologically indistinguishable from you, because that would deprive the property of being a person of any interest. So they want to say that the organism is not intelligent, not conscious. It's not a person, and it generally has no mental properties. Or at best, it's got mental properties in some derivative sense. It somehow inherits them from the organism.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But then the organism, or the thing that constitutes the person, is physically identical to the person, but is not. Sorry, physically identical to the person, but has no mental properties, not strictly speaking, anyway. And that's the definition of a zombie, that the zombie in the philosopher's sense.
Yeah.
And in the same way, the computer that constitutes the artificially intelligent being would be a zombie in the same way.
Yeah. Can you see anyone just biting the bullet on that and saying, like, yeah, sure, the organism that is me is a philosophical zombie, and I'm the person, and likewise, yeah, sure, the computer is a philosophical zombie, but the artificial thinker is not.
Yes, people do accept that.
Okay.
I suppose it well, you just described it as biting the bullet. That suggests that there's a cost involved, that it's painful to bite the bullet. And I suppose it's painful because, well, Well, it doesn't sound very plausible to start with. It's pretty wild. It also raises the question of why the organism has no mental properties. Why is it a zombie?
Yeah.
I mean, the philosophers of mind who are keen on zombies, they say that, well, they deny that there are any zombies, and they say that they think there could be zombies. But if you ask them why are those being zombies rather than conscious, they say it's because the laws of nature in that possible world are different from ours. Right?
Mhm.
We are conscious rather than zombies because there's a certain law of nature connecting our neural properties with mental properties, and this law doesn't hold in some other possible world. So that's why. So there's a difference.
Yeah.
It's not a physical difference. It's a difference in which psychophysical laws hold. Okay.
Yeah.
But of course, in this case, there's no such difference. It's the same psychophysical laws, it's the same laws of nature. You have to give some other account of why the organism isn't conscious, isn't rational, doesn't have any beliefs, and so on.
Yeah, and my thought was if we let in philosophical zombies into our world, right, with the same psychophysical, whatever laws that we have, then maybe we've just exacerbated the problem of other minds, because now I think philosophical zombies are possible in this world, and so maybe Dr. Eric Olson is a philosophical zombie and doesn't have the additional thinker that is conscious.
I suppose, yes. I mean, this view implies that there are as many zombies as there are conscious people.
Right.
Though, I mean, the theory tells us that every philosophical zombie constitutes a person.
Yes, yes.
And of course, I mean, you might have doubts about that.
Well, I have evidence that I'm not merely a psychological zombie on this take, because I think I'm conscious, and we talked about Descartes and all sorts of stuff, but I don't have that same evidence for you. So if I think philosophical zombies are possible, but I have to infer that you also have the additional conscious thinker, then maybe it's it's more simple to cut off that second one, or maybe it's the problem of their minds is exacerbated.
It is, but I'm not sure whether that makes the problem of other minds worse.
Okay.
I mean, even if you didn't accept any of this constitution stuff and you just thought that people were organisms, you might still worry about whether another organism with similar physical properties to you and similar behavior had any mental properties or not, whether it was conscious.
Well, so yeah, you're probably right on this. My thought was we could always say, look, maybe there's a possible world where there's philosophical zombies, but that's because the laws are different. And in this world, I'm not a philosophical zombie, so I don't think those laws apply here. But if I did think that I'm, a philosophical zombie and a conscious being constituted by that, then I bring the zombies over into this world and say they are possible here. So that's why I was thinking maybe it exacerbates it, because
Maybe.
I'm saying this world is a world that has philosophical zombies. So why should I think anyone else actually does have consciousness if I know that philosophical zombies are possible and I don't have direct awareness of anyone else's conscious states?
Yes, I'll have to think about that. I mean, if you think, yes, well, I suppose somebody might say, whatever it is that justifies your belief that other people are conscious, if we don't accept constitution,
Yeah.
will also ought to justify the belief that other human organisms like us, like you, constitute conscious beings.
Yeah.
And that's some sort of metaphysical law, I suppose. I suppose every constitution theorist would say that it's metaphysically impossible for there to be, I suppose, well, they certainly would say it was metaphysically impossible to take a lump of clay, shape it into the shape of Socrates, and then without creating a statue. I mean, nobody would worry about whether somebody else's sculptural activity created a statue, or whether it creates a statue every time I do it, or whether or only every second time. And I suppose if if you accept the Constitution, you have to accept that this is unnecessary truth, this metaphysical principle about that whenever something is in a certain condition, it comes to constitute something else with certain properties.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, Jonathan Schaffer just came up with a mind-making metaphysical principle in a paper he recently wrote, and it sounds pretty similar. So we're just moving from like a nomenological to a metaphysical law of constitution, maybe in this case, instead of like ground functionalism that he's going for. That's fascinating. All right, okay, so that's good. I like it. So there's another problem though that you brought up in the paper, and that was determining spatial boundaries. If you're an animalist, you can say, the physical, the boundaries of the person are anything that's caught up in the life of that organism.
Mm.
But if you're an AI theorist, you don't believe that this is an organism, and so, yeah, can you elaborate on the problem for the AI theorist and why they don't get to use the caught up in the life thing from Peter Van Wagen?
Okay, well, here's the question, I guess. If there were an artificially intelligent being somehow in or on the computer, and if it were a physical object, we could ask what physical object is it, or more precisely, how big is it? Which parts of the computer are parts of the object? Does it extend? I mean, are all the parts of the computer parts of the intelligent being, including the mouse and the keyboard and the power cable? And the little logo on the back and so on, are only certain parts of it, and what determines how far that artificial intelligent being extends, which things are parts of it. I think we can answer that question in the case of natural things, if we're organisms anyway.
Yeah.
I think this is actually a hard problem for the Constitution theorists. It's hard for them to explain why I'm constituted by the whole organism and not just by some part of it, like my upper half.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
But leaving that aside, so what principle? So if I'm an organism, then the question becomes what determines the boundaries of a biological organism, and that seems to be something to do with metabolism and those characteristic biological functions to do with the immune system and so on. So my hands are parts of me because they're caught up in my bloodstream, in my immune system. And so on.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my chair, which you can't see, is not a part of me. There it is, because it's not caught up in any of those biological functions, biological activities of mine.
Yeah.
Okay, but of course, an artificial thinker wouldn't have it. It's got no biology at all. So what determines where it comes to an end?
Yeah. And so it ends up becoming like a really small part of the computer, right? Like a things that are
how you want to answer the question, but the question must have some answer.
Yeah.
And it's natural, I suppose. You might say, well, the artificial thinker is composed of all those parts of the computer hardware which are somehow directly involved in realizing the program.
Yeah.
There's some sort of electronic event that the artificial intelligence consists in. It's a certain pattern of transistors, I suppose, that are on or off, something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you might say, yeah, the mouse is not part of the artificial thinker because although I can use the mouse to affect the artificial thinker, it's not directly involved in the electronics that realizes the AI program.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's only those parts of the computer that are directly involved in the AI program. Something like that seems like the natural answer to give. That would suggest that in your case, if we ask what determines which things are parts of you, we would say, well, you consist of all and only those atoms that are directly caught up in your mental activity, in your mental states.
Yeah.
So you're a part of your brain, I suppose.
Uh-huh.
In this case, in the case of the artificial thinker, it would consist of it would be a sort of very small spidery thing made up of little bits of wire and little bits of silicon.
Yeah.
I suppose something like that.
Well, I thought about in the I think you mentioned this also in the paper, that the analogous case for me, I'm just like I'm a couple neurons, or I'm a spidery weird that's really what I am, even though I think these are my hands and stuff. It's like, well, no, if instead of going for the full biological organism, when we go for what's involved in thinking, it might, well, if you believe that you're a biological organism, it seems like the whole organism's involved in the thinking, right? So we have a
It's
reason not to think we're a spidery web of a couple neurons.
well, I'm not sure whether I mean, even if you think you're an organism, it still seems right to say that my brain is more directly involved in my thinking than my thumb is.
Sure. Yeah.
It's right, even though I don't accept this view that my parts are all and only those things that are directly involved in my thinking.
Right.
That seems a bit mad, but that, I'm only saying that's the sort of thing that you might have to say if you thought that an artificial intelligent being was something other than the whole computer.
Right. Yeah. I love that. I love this stuff. This is so much fun for me. I really appreciate you going through it with me. There's two immaterialist views that you cover, and I don't know why I think this way, but intuitively I thought these would be better views, and maybe it's because I've seen I've seen a lot of sci-fi movies and stuff like Age of Ultron, where Ultron is this evil AI and he's trying to take over the world, he's trying to destroy the world, and the Avengers have to fight him. But he can go into different computers, and he's got a physical body, but it's not really. That doesn't. That's not all of Ultron, right? Ultron is more than his physical body, and he goes and he's in the internet and all sorts of stuff. So I initially thought, yeah, like this program view that you go over might make more sense, and then you give so many like tough problems for it. So can we go over the program view? What is a program view of an artificial thinker?
Well, I guess that's the view that the artificial thinker is the program. It's the AI program.
Yeah.
And that might, and people sometimes say that, although it's a bit unclear because the word program is ambiguous.
Sure.
It's got a type token ambiguity, right? So there's a certain program there's the browser that I'm using to conduct this conversation with you. I think it's Chrome.
Yeah.
That's okay. There's the Chrome, whatever it is, with some number after it. That's a computer program. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it's well, it could be, you could think of it as a type. It's something that was developed by certain people at a certain time, and it's got a copyright on it, and it's running on both your machine and my machine, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Running on lots of machines at the same time. It's a type. It's like the book Moby Dick, which exists in all sorts of editions and in multiple copies and so on. So that's the sense in which a computer program is a set of instructions, which be implemented on all sorts of different computers at the same time. Okay. But it doesn't sound plausible to suppose that a program as a universal or as a type could be intelligent, because the program doesn't change. Suppose the program is running on both your machine and my machine. It looks like that would be two different conscious beings. You might be torturing your artificial intelligent being, and I might be giving mine cups of tea or whatever the appropriate electronic version of being nice to it is. It looks like there are two different conscious beings here, but there's only one program in the type sense. So that seems, well, that doesn't seem right. That seems like a sort of confusion.
It could have potentially contradictory properties, or it could both be happy and not happy at the same time in the same manner.
So it looks like your artificial intelligent being is very uncomfortable, very unhappy. Mine is reasonably happy and contented because it's well looked after. But how could one being be both happy and unhappy? That looks like a contradiction anyway.
Yeah, because it's multiply instantiable or realizable, or whatever language you use. It could have these country properties. Also, this gets into like abstract objects and whether we can create them or not. Whether Moby Dick is an abstract object that's like multiply realizable or instantiable in different printings and stuff like that, which is really fascinating, crazy. But I think also in the paper you mentioned that the conscious being would come into existence as soon as the algorithm was finished, and
Oh yeah,
so it wouldn't even need the computer to be a thinker, artificial thinker, which seems really odd.
yes, yes. If you think of the program as the type that was created when certain geeky people in somewhere or other finished writing the code, I suppose.
Uh-huh.
And so the abstract object, I suppose it's an abstract object, the Chrome, what is it? Let me just see. Just for the sake of realism, version 99 point, and then never mind.
Realism be damned.
This particular version.
Yeah.
Let me get back. There we go. Okay. Yes. So the program came into being before it was actually run on any computer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you might say the program became conscious after it existed in an unconscious state for an arbitrary amount of time. Right. And likewise, the program, I suppose, will still exist even if we all shut it down and it's not actually conscious any longer.
Yeah.
That seems very unintuitive anyway. I mean, that was precisely the sort of problem that we were trying to avoid by replacing the computer hardware view with the program view.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a big disanalogy between the book Moby Dick and a conscious being, because whatever you say about Moby Dick, whether it's a created abstract object or whatever you want to say, it's not a conscious being. And so there's nothing that it's like to be Moby Dick. And yet if this algorithm is a conscious being, there's something that it's like to be this abstract object. And it came into being after someone finished a code, and whether they programmed it or whether they wrote it down, maybe even, right? Like, so it has to do with like the intentionality of the thinker when he finished or she finished the program. Is that when it came conscious? Like, or does it have to be instantiated and then it's conscious, which then seems more like you're not going for the token, but you're going the type, you're going for the token.
If the thing is conscious and thinking, it has to be able to change, because thinking is an activity.
Yeah.
I don't think you could be conscious in a completely static state.
Totally.
You have to be changing. Okay. And the program as a type is not changing.
Yeah.
It doesn't even seem to be changing even when it's running on the computer. I mean, the particular token of it, so to speak, on the computer, that electronic event, that's changing. But the Chrome 99 point whatever it was, that's not changing, or at least not intrinsically anyway.
Yeah.
That's not the sort of could change, it seems.
Right. Dr. Olson, a lot of my listeners are philosophers of religion or philosophy of religion students, and they might be thinking right now, could this be an argument against like a timeless view of God? If thinking requires change, and like, or maybe are you just bracketing out this is just discursive thought, and perhaps if you had a God that didn't exist in time, maybe he had a current thoughts or something. Is this a new argument against God, do you think?
It's certainly not new.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think this is not an original view of mine, that consciousness requires change or that thought requires change.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't think it's controversial.
Okay.
If you think that God is conscious, or that God has a mental life, God has a psychology in the most literal sense, then that does seem incompatible with the view that God is timeless or outside of time. Seems to be anyway.
Yeah.
Although these are very deep waters.
Sure.
But I'm not sure whether, again, I'm not a philosopher of religion.
Sure.
I'm not sure whether theism commits you to saying that God has a mental life in the literal sense. I mean, God has to have something like knowledge. God has to be a person in the sense that he or she can be addressed.
Uh-huh.
And can have concerns and interests, something like that. But whether requires having a mental life, that seems rather anthropomorphic to me.
Yeah. So, and this is such deep waters, because there's philosophers of religion all over the place, classical theists, neoclassical theists, and such. I think most people would want to say there's something it's like to be God, though, right? Like they're.
Oh, sure. I suppose, yes. But whether that, but what that actually means, does that mean having a psychology? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. That sounds like a sort of analogical talk, and I
Sure.
haven't got enough grip on the notion of what it is like to be.
Yes. Yes, this is so fascinating. Someone in the audience should take this up. I might take this up because I think this is really fascinating. Thanks for going down that train of thought with me there. This brings us to the bundle view. So we there's the type view, which seems really implausible that it's the finished algorithm that, and it's multiply instantiable. It's all crazy. But the bundle view says it's not the type, it's the various tokens of the type. It's my Chrome running on my computer, and it's Dr. Olson. He has a different one because it's running on his computer. I don't know where to point either. Um, can you lay out this view more fully than I was able to do?
Good. No, I think you were doing very well, actually. I
Okay.
can only pick up where you left off and add more detail. So, it seems wrong to say that it's the program type that's doing the work, that's thinking and wondering and suffering or whatever. Just as it seems wrong to say that it's the program type Microsoft Word 8.7.5 or whatever it might be that writes your paper
Mhm.
or converts your keystrokes into text. It's not that thing that's copyrighted. It's the particular copy of it on your computer. It's a certain electronic process that does the work. Okay, so it's natural to, if you like the program view, it seems much more sensible to say that it's not the program type, it's the particular implementation or realization or copy of it, so to speak, on your computer that's doing the work. So
Yeah.
The intelligent being is your copy of the AI program. It's a certain electronic event or activity going on in the computer, and that really does change.
Yeah.
And it exists only while the program is running.
Mhm.
So it's a concrete object and not an abstract object.
Yeah.
It's located in space and time, and so on. It seems like it's much more like the right sort of thing than a program type.
Yeah. And yet, you argue that because it's a series of events or bundles or states, it's there's not really a thinker here, right? It's like thought thinking thought. It's like
Well,
there's
there's certain activity, and maybe it's mental activity.
yeah.
I guess there's the electronic activity in the innards of the computer, and there's the mental activity, and we needn't worry about the connection between those two things. Maybe they're the same thing, and maybe they're different things. Never mind.
Yeah.
That suggests that a natural thinker is also a collection of mental activity or a collection of neural activity, one or the other.
Yeah.
So you're not a physical organism. You're not a visible object. You are a certain mental event, or if you like, a bundle or a collection of mental events and mental states.
Yeah.
Something like that. So the sort of view that's attributed to Hume, whether he actually held that view is disputed. But anyway, it's associated with his name.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So the problem that I have with that view, which you just alluded to, is this that it seems to be saying that it's mental activity itself that thinks, and that seems like a very elementary sort of confusion. Thinking is mental activity, so the thing that does the activity or that engages in the activity is not the activity itself.
Yeah.
That would be like saying that it's motion that moves,
Or the nothing that noths.
Sorry,
the nothing that noths, as Heidegger says.
Right. Well, I'm not sure whether that's the same point or not, but don't ask me any questions on Heidegger.
Yeah.
Yeah. That seems wrong. It seems like if there is something engaged in the activity, if there is a thinking thing, it must be something other than the thinking itself.
Yeah.
Seems like, anyway.
I really like this, and I do think a lot about philosophy, religion type stuff. But I think of Aristotle's view of God, that it's thought thinking thought, and it seems like that it's committing the same kind of maybe category error or something here. That there's, unless you mean by thought, thinker thinking thoughts, okay, sure, but that's a weird thing because it seems like it's just thought thinking thought. And this goes back to our conversation of Descartes, that if there is thinking, there is a thinker. So it's a confusion to say thinking can think itself, or thinking can think other thoughts without there being a thinker itself.
Yeah, I don't know what Aristotle meant by that, but I mean, the idea that it's bundles of thought that makes exactly as much sense as the idea that it's dances that dance and it's movements that move.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, so you finished out with just this relaxed view, and this is like an instrumentalist view or an anti-realist view, and it changes the question from ontology to usefulness of attributing thinking. Should we take an intentional stance, maybe to quote Dennett, towards this computer or not? And it seems like that's just, you're asking a different question here, right?
I guess what I call the relaxed view is the thought that, well, there's no sort of nice, neat answer to the question, what is it that thinks in the case of the artificial thinker? If you want to say the computer thinks, including the mouse and the keyboard and the power cable, that's fine. If you want to say it's the CPU that thinks, that's okay. If you want to say it's the electronic event that realizes the program, that's okay too. Those are all equally accurate. But there's no answer to the metaphysical question, what is the thing that thinks? We can say what we like. The only question is one of those answers might be more useful than others, but there isn't any one that's right and the other's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a sort of anti-metaphysical view, I suppose, although it is, I suppose, itself a metaphysical view, but it's a metaphysical view that sort of subsumes all the other metaphysical views and says we don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
But that, I suppose, and I don't know that view is wrong. That might be true for all I know, but it deprives the question of artificial intelligence of its philosophical interest.
Yeah. Because
then if there's no answer to the question, what is it that thinks in artificial intelligence, then there should be also no answer to the question whether what happens when we run our AI program is thinking or merely a simulation of thinking.
Right.
We can say what we like.
Yeah.
Is which is more useful. So now the question of what just becomes how useful is it, practically speaking, to attribute mental properties to certain computers or computer systems or electronic events or what have you.
Yeah.
And that's not really a very interesting question, I suppose.
No.
I mean, we can all agree. It's certainly not a question that's much disputed. We can agree that it's often useful to speak as if the computer knows a lot about the weather system, or how to play chess, or how to drive a car, or whatever. Just as useful to think that to attribute mental states to the mental properties to the photocopier, because it thinks it's out of paper.
Yeah. Or the thermostat that thinks it needs to turn on the heat because the room's too cold.
The thermostat has realized that the room is too cold.
Yeah. I hear this one a lot from computer scientists. Like my audience will know, like Lex Friedman, really popular in AI, and they focus on the Turing test, and they give noises to Roombas, so when it runs into something, it says "ouch," and then you start to feel bad for it, But again, that's not really answering the question of ontology. It doesn't seem like, or consciousness. Is there anything that it's like to be the Roomba just because you've given it a noise to say when it runs into something? No, of course not. So it's more about like our own psychology than the ontology of artificial intelligence.
I mean, you might just be dismissive of this philosophical question. Is the vacuum cleaner or whatever it is conscious? Does it have beliefs and so on? Then maybe there's no answer to this question. That's, well, I don't know. It's a bit worrying in a way, because if that's the case, then the same is true of human beings. Are they am I conscious and intelligent? Are you
Right.
conscious and intelligent? Is the person that we've just put in prison conscious and intelligent? Well, there's no answer to that question. It's just a matter of what's most practical or most useful. And you might
Right.
well think, it's most useful for us, the elite in power, to treat these people
Yeah.
as if they didn't have any consciousness or mental properties. And there's nothing wrong with that, because there's no fact of the matter. That's a very disturbing view. I wouldn't want that
Terrifying. Terrifying. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dr. Olson, thanks so much for all your time and for this wonderful paper. I had to have you on because it needs to get a huge audience. I hope everyone watches. I hope this gets a bunch of views because it's a really, really important question, not just about artificial intelligence itself or the artificial thought, but also the question of artificial thinkers should be answered, should be thought about more, should be pondered over. Just a final question for you, Dr. Olson. Do you think that we'll be able to invent AGI, artificial thinkers? Like, any way, one way or the other, any leanings?
You mean assuming that it's metaphysically possible?
Do you think it's metaphysically possible?
Well, I don't know. I've got doubts.
Sure.
I'm skeptical.
Okay.
Very skeptical. But if it is metaphysically possible, well, I don't know. I don't know. I suppose if it is metaphysically possible, and if computer science continues to progress at its current rate for another 100 years or 1,000 years or whatever, then probably yes.
Okay.
But whether that will happen is a question about world history and politics, and whether we manage to destroy ourselves, or whether our civilization will continue. And I haven't got a very confident answer to that question.
Well, is there any way to adjudicate on the metaphysical question? How might we go about doing that? Is it just by letting the computer scientists continue on and seeing if they are successful?
That's not going to settle the metaphysical question.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Computer scientists can create gadgets that behave more and more like intelligent beings, and
Right.
they've made a lot of progress already, even in our lifetime. But that's not going to settle the question of whether what they've created is a mere simulation of intelligence, or whether it really is an intelligent being.
Right. So how do we decide? How are we able to, you think?
It's a philosophical question, and there's no shortcut to answering philosophical questions. Leave it to the scientists.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, I hope that your paper it plays a major role in that conversation, the metaphysical question of consciousness. All right, folks. Well, actually, Dr. Olson, before I let you go here, is there any like website or anything like that I should point my listeners to where they can find more of your work?
Oh gosh, that's a bit difficult. I used to have a website with all of my papers and interviews and so on, and the university took it away because it's considered it a security risk. And
Oh no.
I've been meaning for quite a long time now to create my own webpage with all that stuff, and I haven't yet done it.
Okay. Well, no problem. If you do get around to that, just send me the yeah. If you get around to that, just send me the link and I can put it in the description whenever. And
Thank you.
yeah, and people can find you online just by searching your name as well.
I'm hoping that you'll promote my career, Parker, and make me.
That's right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Parker's Pensées bump for your career after this episode. That's great. Well, folks, that's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.